it's weird when you start telling your kids like, oh, when I was in high school, my daughters will just cut me off like, yeah, we saw the movie. And I'm like, oh yeah, okay. Shut up, Dad. We saw the movie. Yeah.
We know all the stories. So we're here with author Melissa Maerz, who is the new author of a book that was just released, All Right, All Right, All Right. It is the oral history of Richard Linklater's 1993 hit, Dazed and Confused. Thanks for joining me, guys.
Thanks for having us.
Hello.
Hello. Well, Rick, I mean, you're one of the nicest artists around, but also one of the most humble, who doesn't seem to like to talk about yourself too much. And I know that you might have tired of talking about Dazed and Confused after all these many years. So when Melissa reached out, what was the immediate inclination?
Well, my first inclination was like, hell no, I don't want to. I think I sat on that for a couple of days. And then, I don't know, you get emails and it's like, that was a long letter. She seemed pretty, I started feeling guilty or something. I was like, I should go back and read that. It's like, she's really passionate about this. It's hard to make a living as a writer. I should support, what's it? A few hours out of my life, it could be, whatever. I just go down the rabbit hole. So I just kind of went, I got back in touch. She can tell it. I just said, yeah, sure. If all you need from me is an interview and a thing, yeah, go ahead. I knew we'd be digging up some uncomfortable PTSD kind of induced things for me, but what the hell? I was at a stage in my life, I think I was doing some other things around this time too that were kind of, I don't know. Every now and then you're in a mood to get a full body scan of your life, or you can deal with it. You can deal with it. So I'll say that. And she was very nice and very sincere in what she was doing. It wasn't exploitive. She was really trying to dig into something. So I respect that from any writer. So what the hell,
When you say you were kind of looking back or going through something at that time, I assume this is a couple of years ago. In what way is looking through the lens of Dazed and Confused back at your life different than looking at it through the lens of another film?
Well, yeah, it's multi-pronged because not only is it an experience in my life. In 92, Universal gave me $6 million or whatever to make this movie, which was a big leap for me as a filmmaker and a film I definitely want to do. But then I jumped back to the 70s being the age of the people in the movie. So it's kind of a double thing. It's something I actually lived through. And it was personal in that regard. So, and I think one of the most fascinating things to me, or most intriguing, little unnerving, is that she really does go back to the source. She goes back to my high school and starts talking to a bunch of people about that. I thought, well, that's a deep dive for sure. But I kind of respected that. It was, to me, that was the most intriguing stuff to read, people's memories from all that time ago.
Melissa, besides the fact that it's one of the great American movies of the past 50 years, what made you want to go back and investigate Dazed and Confused?
Well, obviously, I love the movie, and I knew it would have interesting stories because it's such a hinge point in so many people's lives. It was Rick's first studio movie. It was a lot of people's first movie or first breakthrough movie. And I'd heard that there were some good party stories from behind the scenes. But I think personally, the thing that made me want to write it is that Rick had given an interview where he talked about the fact that he wanted Dazed and Confused to be an anti-nostalgia movie, a movie that showed that the 70s were not great. And I thought, wow, how did that happen that it's become the ultimate nostalgia movie for so many people, and not just nostalgic about high school, but also nostalgic about the 70s, and also now I think nostalgic about the 90s. So I think that was kind of an entry point for me.
Rick, as much as you like looking at time and looking backwards, you're not a nostalgic filmmaker, it doesn't feel like. But, if to do the hacky writer thing, if you look up the nostalgia, the words that make it up, which are homecoming and pain from the Greek and the Homeric languages, so it's the pain of going home. So as much as we think of nostalgia as being this gauzy, wonderful thing, there is something about it that's painful. So in what way would you admit that this was a nostalgic piece of work, and what did you intend it to be at the origin, and what did it end up becoming?
Yeah, I found it really fascinating that Melissa kind of glommed onto that, because it wasn't my thinking. You know, I was like, oh, these teenage movies, they always make it look so good. Even the contemporary ones, they kind of gloss over. I was going to make something that really gets in the muck. And I thought, oh, the 70s, you know, it really sucked. You know, it was a terrible time. You know, so I'm going to show that in a movie. It was so naive of me. Like, it really got me thinking, because that was my intention. Even I had the character say it, the 70s obviously suck. But I really underestimated the power of cinema. And it really got me thinking, because it was obviously, I failed in my thinking there that it could be anti-nostalgic. And I was like, oh, it's a lot like anti-war movies. You know, some Spielberg, oh, this is going to be the film that makes you never want to go to war. It's like, well, no. People see Private Ryan and they go, that first scene's pretty tough, but man, there's so much heroism. War. Yeah, so you can't represent it without kind of endorsing it. I think that's just the power of the medium. I think you could do it maybe in print in a different way. You could put stats and you could kind of appeal to the intellect. But film is just such a powerful, experiential, find yourself into these people's, you know, it just pulls you in a way. So it's hard to make a film that's anti much of anything. You know, Wall Street, people thought, you know, Stone makes these critiques of the world, and what does it do? Everybody wants to be a stockbroker. You know, everybody wants to, like, you know, it's, I don't know.
Is it just because of the grandiosity of film?
I think it's just the power. Film, bless it, you know, that's the power. If it didn't have that quality, we wouldn't have anti-heroes. You look at, you know, say Taxi Driver, and you're like, I like Travis Bickle. It's like, well, he's trying to kill me. He's terrible. But, you know, you like bad guys. You like bad trouble because you know them. You know them. It's personal. You've lived inside their head, the way cinema can do that. So I think you can do that on all subjects. So I underestimated the power of the medium, but it got me thinking about it ever since then. So I like that was one subject. It was just one of many things I failed on the movie with, actually.
Melissa, I would guess that this is it's definitely the first book I've ever read that starts out with the first chapter being set in Huntsville, Texas. What, to go back and talk to so many of Rick's high school classmates and relative peers?
I mean, that was one of my favorite parts of this book too, is just getting to talk to the people that Rick went to school with, because I knew that it was semi-autobiographical, but I don't think I realized how specific the details were to Rick's life. And I think that was surprising. That was one of the biggest surprises in writing this book was, you know, going back and hearing people talk about, you know, the real fire tower, which was their version of the moon tower in Huntsville, or, you know, the real Emporium, or people who had some of the same names as the characters in the movie, and also people who believe very firmly that they're in the movie, even if their names are not. I mean, I think that kind of speaks to why this movie is so, you know, years and years later, why so many people still love it, is because everyone kind of thinks it's about them. It feels very personal for people.
Yeah, that's interesting that, you know, film critics and writers of all types always say that the more specific a story becomes, the more universal it is. And Rick, did you have that sense when you were writing these characters that the more you drilled down, the more general and universal it would become?
Yeah, well, I believe that in fiction in general, that, it's all about specificity. I'd made that leap years before. So I wasn't conflicted about that. I'm going to really try to depict exactly, because, you know, you can't help. You're transforming it into something else. So I think that kind of personal detail is a great starting point, because it's never an end point. It's just a huge element. So that's just where it started. I spent a few years just, you know, writing down a funny line of dialogue or a scene or something, you know. So I just had all these note cards and ideas and songs and lyrics. You know, it was just a big collage in my mind. Once I opened that gate to go back to that time, because I had definitely been avoiding that or not. I needed to get a safe distance on those years to say, okay, I'm ready to revisit that now, but it took a while, that's for sure.
Melissa writes about how you're a big fan of Francois Truffaut, and he'd walk around with a notepad and almost listen in on the world around him and write the things he heard and the things he knew. And reading Melissa's book, you see so much of these anecdotes from the Huntsville folks replicated in the movie. Is that a form of writing that you continued with throughout your career that we're just not aware of completely?
No, I think it's really consistent with everything. I've always kind of worked that way, just jotting down notes. I was never really eavesdropping on recording conversations, nothing that specific. It was just, I always trusted my own memory. If I remembered something someone said, it must be good. If I remember why, if I'm still thinking about that years later, it passed my test to maybe make it into the movie. So it wasn't so systematic, but I think I did have a feeling, and it's in the book, I was just describing the idea that everything had happened, if not to me, to somebody, you know? So I was able in the movie to incorporate some of my friends, collaborators, some little details from their lives. I was like, you know, that's pretty good. I remember a kid coming in on audition and telling me about he had almost been in a fight at a party. And that ends up kind of the basis for the Clint, you know, the Adam Goldberg, Nikki Katt fight. It's like, oh yeah, just some excuse. And we've all had that experience, but it was the specifics of, I'm smelling some marijuana, you know, so I was, you know, you're a sponge. You're taking it all in from not only your own memory and that time, but as you get to working on it and get closer to it, there's all this stuff coming at you too. So the director's always just choosing yes, no, yes, no. It's 99 no's to everyone yes, to be sure, you know.
Melissa, were you surprised in talking to some of the people about who the story is loosely based, or at least Rick's classmates, how traumatized some people were by something that ends up becoming kind of a fun movie?
Yeah, well, I think, you know, one of the great things about Dazed and Confused is that you can really watch it in different ways. You know, I was just doing an interview with this journalist and his husband, and he was saying that, like, as a gay kid, it was impossible for him to watch the scenes where, you know, kids are getting hazed and getting beaten. And his husband was like, I was in a fraternity, and I remember that being really fun. And, like, I loved being able to watch those scenes. So I think you can really see it as a fun party movie, and you can see those scenes as fun party scenes, or you can see them as being really traumatic. And I thought it was interesting to talk to some of the women, especially from Huntsville, who remembered getting covered in ketchup and mustard and remembered kind of getting hurt when they were being hazed, who said that they were upset, not at the way Rick portrayed it. I mean, I think that Rick portrays it in a very realistic way to them, but at the way people received it in the theater, that they were mad that people were laughing at those scenes. So it's just interesting to see different perspectives.
Yeah, it takes, I remember talking to some Huntsville people who were like, yeah, I didn't think that was, it took me a while to realize that was a comedy, because it was just, it's kind of triggering things in them. So I think that's fair enough. But at least they did. Trauma is maybe too big a word. It's just definitely, you know, unearthing some old stuff, you know. Sure.
So, Rick, you were good looking, popular, successful athlete in high school. So what was, yet you obviously feel the same way about high school that so many of us do. I mean, what is it about the high school experience that strikes you, and why is it such a hard period of life for almost everybody, regardless of how successful it was for them?
Yeah, even on the surface, you know, I was an athlete and all that stuff, but I was still kind of a shy introvert, you know, that was my inner being. So I saw it from that perspective. And, you know, if you're not, it was unnerving, so much of it, and uncomfortable. And I do remember even at the time saying, God, if I'm feeling weird, because I think I'm seen as a certain way, but everybody must really be having a horrible time here if I am. I remember thinking that. I was like, probably not too inaccurately.
Right. You talk about yourself a little bit more in this book than I've seen in other places, or that I've heard from you specifically. You know, the year at Bel Air and leading the city and batting. Was it fun to talk about yourself more, or was it easy to?
That's the only place I allow myself to brag about myself, is like, oh, how good a baseball player I was or something. That's kind of fun, you know. It's so meaningless, but that's you know, that's a good area to put all your petty competitiveness into. Uh,
What? How did your athletic career inform your filmmaking in any way? And I see in the way Melissa writes about your interactions with these young actors and this collaborative process. I think of you as being a baseball manager. Are you a Dusty Baker type? Like what? How does your athleticism inform your filmmaking and your collaborative spirit?
I think it's always been there. You can't help but learn from your coaches, along the way. I even tell actors now up front. I was doing a film a few years ago, Last Flag Flying, with, it was pretty male. It was like 4 or 5, strong male figures. And I was like, hey guys, I'm the head coach here. Okay. I'm not going to, when you hit a home run, I'm just going to shake your hand. I'm not going to kiss your ass. I'm not your therapist. I'm not your priest. Just be a pro. I'm saying it kind of jokingly, but I'm not going to be a guy. And I realized, that's kind of how I am. I'm not really like, oh, that was great. And I was like, hey, that was good. Yeah, we achieved. When you hit a home run, he goes, yeah, you hit it well. That's what you practice. When it works, is it some earth-shattering thing? No, it's, you should be able to hit this mark fairly consistently. And I tell cast members, it's like sports. You work very hard. You try to perfect something. But unlike sports, the arts gives you multiple takes. You can do it till you get it just right. If you could go back and say, hey, throw the ball right down the middle and let me get another whack at that. Sports doesn't work that way, but filmmaking does. So I always found that very you really can control and perfect, and it's not about competition. So it's a better place to be. But I obviously, it's kind of a cliche, you hear it a lot, but I learned a lot in any group mentality, group interactions, the relation between the authority figures, the bosses, and the workers, or the coach and the players. So I don't know. I took in a lot and kind of wanted to be the better version of, like we all do, what would work for me. I always had in mind what worked for me best as a player were the coaches that leave me alone and didn't screw with my head too much, didn't challenge me in stupid ways. I didn't need that. Other people might. What I learned most was everybody has different needs. Some people need more than others, and you just got to try to give that to them,
Melissa, you got to talk to almost every actor from the movie, almost every major person that was a part of the movie. Was there anything that was revelatory or most revelatory to you in talking to them, and not just the dynamic of the time of making the movie, but what the lasting impression on them was?
Well, I was surprised by how emotional a lot of people still feel about the movie. It's interesting to me that someone like Ben Affleck told me that he only has 2 posters from the films that he's done. And one is Argo, which obviously he won an Oscar for. One of them is Dazed and Confused, still hanging in his house. And I think he called it the most profound creative experience of his life, or one of the most profound creative experiences of his life. But also someone like Jason London, who has kind of a sad story in the aftermath of Dazed and Confused. He lost his sister right afterward. And I think he kind of still views Dazed and Confused as the last time in his life that was really kind of happy and full of promise. So he still has a lot of, I think a lot of people still have a lot of really emotional feelings tied up in this movie.
It's only your second feature, Rick. How did the making of it inform the decisions you would make going forward, the successes of it and the difficulties of it in the actual filmmaking process?
Yeah, it was such a leap for me, and it was kind of going in I think having studied other filmmakers, there's that film. Usually you've made a couple films. It was technically my 3rd film. I had made a Super 8 feature. I'd made my 60. Each one was a leap, working completely alone, working with, a crew of about 7, but still putting yourself out there and collaborating with a lot of people. And then this one was the big leap. Those were both big leaps. This was a leap of taking other people's money, other people's opinions, executive level people. It's like, oh, can I do that? Can I, and you learn how to officially how really to make a movie, a call sheet, full schedules, the utilitarian design of how to maximize time and money and, all that. You have meal penalties, there's unions, there's all these so it's like, okay, can I create within that? So it was a huge challenge. And it was just something to get used to. You try not to let it distract you. But it was really, it's funny. Someone asked me if you could do this on another film I've made. I said, well, you wouldn't want to. It didn't have the drama. This one had a lot of drama just based on, I think it was a bunch of young people, my colleagues, kind of stepping into a different arena, and conflicts that went with that, going from indie to studio in that way. And I haven't had that drama since. I did learn what I needed and what I didn't need. It was more mine from here on. So ever since then, all the mini films since, I've never had that same experience again. It's always been, I'm Mr. No Drama Obama when it comes to, production. This is the only one that got dramatic, and it was this weird combo of a bunch of young actors, who are just volatile by their nature. Wonderful, but they've got strong emotions the way young people, and having the summer of their life and everything. And then my own inexperience clashing with a system. So there was just a lot of inherent drama there that I never had to experience again. That's why it's such a mixed bag for me to go back and relive it. I'm like, ugh, I just one of those things you had to go through once,
When you look back on it, and you talked about looking back at your career through the lens of Dazed with this book, it's almost a bit, you've had some liberty more than a lot of filmmakers, but it's almost a time capsule of a certain auteurship era in American filmmaking that lasted until about the end of the century. Does it feel anachronistic? Does it feel like looking back on something that's changed? What was the feeling on that?
It struck me sometimes, like really looking at it from outside, it was like, oh, I thought this is a rite of passage. But, filmmakers aren't having this rite of passage anymore, really. Studios aren't making, no big studio is going to give some punk who had an indie success $6 million to make a movie. I mean, it just doesn't, it's not the same. The industry changed a whole lot. So if it was the end of an era, you never really realize that while you're in it, but it was kind of the end. It was sort of the tail end of something that within our industry that allowed films like this to even get made. They get made now, but it's just it's different. It's not studio indie. It's somewhere in between. And it's always hard to get that film made no matter what. I'm not saying that doesn't happen, but probably not at this level,
Melissa, you went into it, just out of kind of a love for the movie, and weren't kind of engineering it to tell a certain story, it sounds like. But what did you take away from all the investigation of the movie and talking to all these people?
Well, it's funny what Rick said about going into it wanting to be an anti-nostalgia movie and then coming away realizing that it's impossible to make an anti-nostalgia movie through, the way that cinema works. I feel like a similar process happened to me with this book, where I think even when I wrote Rick, I was thinking, the first time I wrote him, I was thinking, this will be a book like about the concept of nostalgia. And it is that in some ways, but I don't think I realized it would be a book that was so full of nostalgia too, that it was so much about the cast being like, God, I miss the 90s. I mean, these are actual quotes from the book of people saying things like that, just because they had so much fun on this film. So I think I don't know, my experience kind of mirrored that experience that Rick was having a little bit.
Rick, if you had to go read if you got to go read a book of an oral history of a making of a movie, what movie would it be?
I mean, some mythical making of.
Yeah.
How the hell?
Some magnum opus.
Oh my God, there's so many you could just jump into. I want to read the book on the making of Andrei Rublev, Tarkovsky's. I just watched that the other day with my daughters. I was like, how the hell did they do that? Anyway, I'd love to hear. I always like it when your film heroes, some god, you see them struggling with just the most petty little things, the same things you struggle with. The lights going down, so-and-so, the actor's not ready, or, something's going, I don't know. I think there's something similar to every making of, and yet each one's completely unique, to every film has its own problems, I guess. Its own unique combo of personalities trying to manifest this thing in the world, so I think it's pretty interesting genre actually Melissa finds herself in. I read that Chinatown book recently. That was wonderful. I thought that was great. So I don't know. Did I answer your question? I mean, you could do it for almost any movie. I did an interview recently on Raging Bull. I think he's a French writer or maybe British writer who was doing a total thing on Raging Bull. So I'll read that one.
You mentioned your daughter. Is there anything that you learned in making Dazed and thinking about high school to the extent that you did that informed your parenting at all or made you a better father?
I don't know.
Or a more sympathetic one?
Sympathetic, perhaps. It's weird when you start telling your kids like, oh, when I was in high school, my daughters will just cut me off like, yeah, we saw the movie. And I'm like, oh yeah, okay. Shut up, Dad. We saw the movie. Yeah.
We know all the stories. So Melissa, in wrapping up, why do people still care about Dazed and Confused?
You know, I bring up a lot of times one of my favorite quotes in the book, which is this guy, Jason David Scott, who was a unit publicist on the movie. And he was like, that movie was exactly my high school, except the music was different and the costumes were different. And I was in LA and it was a different time period. You know, and yet still it's something that he feels like was his life. And I think that's really true for so many people. I mean, so many people have told me like, you know, we didn't have a moon tower, but we had this water tower that we climbed, or, you know, we didn't have the Emporium, but we had this other type of pool hall. Everybody has something that they feel like they can relate to it. And even if none of the details are things they can relate to, it's still the vibe of the movie that it really gets what it feels like to be a teenager. So I think that's probably why we're still talking about it, you know, almost 30 years later.
Last question, Rick. Robert Plant lived in Austin for a few years off and on. I would imagine you probably ran into him once or twice. Did you ever have the conversation?
No, I didn't run into him. I was always afraid to run into. No, I had friends who I probably could have engineered it. Like I knew often kind of where it was, but I'm shy. I wasn't gonna. It would be awkward. I would just hate that moment where he's like, oh, wait a second, you're that guy. I didn't want to. I left it. I was kind of afraid. I knew people who saw him at Whole Foods, and people were seeing him. I wouldn't mind a Whole Foods spotting to see him, but I didn't know what I would say. I was embarrassed. So, as I should be.
Well, I appreciate both of y'all taking the time. Congrats on the book, Rick. Congrats on all the movies.
Yeah.
We'll talk to you guys later on.
Thank you so much. Nice to see you guys.
Good seeing you.